Hello. My name is Debórah Dwork, and I am the director of the Center for the Study of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Crimes Against Humanity at the Graduate Center, City University of New York. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the first of our year-long virtual series in praise of books. According to PEN America, the second half of 2023 saw an unprecedented surge of book bans. More books were banned in those 6 months than in the previous year. Protesting that censorship and suppression, we very intentionally celebrate new scholarship by emerging as well as established scholars, prizing their creativity and rigor. I thank our series partners, NYU's Professor Emerita of Hebrew and Judaic Studies, Marian Kaplan, and Stockton University Professor in the Study of Modern Genocide, Raz Segal. I thank, too, Center Associate Juan Acevedo, Dr. Eli Karetny, Deputy Director of the Ralph Bunche Institute, and the GC's terrific IT people, Brad Holscher, Steve Thomas, and Eric Williard. Above all, I am grateful to our speakers and to everyone who has tuned in. Thank you for joining. It is my pleasure to say a few words about our presenters today. Fazil Moradi, the author of Being Human, is a visiting associate professor in the Faculty of Humanities at the University of Johannesburg, and he serves as associate researcher at the Institute for Social Anthropology in the Austrian Academy of Sciences. Transdisciplinary in his approach, Dr. Moradi's inquiries led him to work with medical researchers at Sweden's Gothenburg University on the long-term impact of chemical warfare agents. We are honored to count him an affiliate scholar at our center. Victoria Sanford, public scholar and internationally recognized expert on the Guatemalan genocide, is a writer, human rights advocate, and the Lehmann Professor of Excellence at Lehman College and the Graduate Center. A prolific author, her most recent book is Textures of Terror: The Murder of Claudina Isabel and Her Father's Quest for Justice. Among the myriad ways that Professor Sanford deploys her scholarship in pursuit of justice, she served as an expert in the Spanish National Court's genocide case against the Guatemalan generals and in an indigenous lands right case in the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Professors Moradi and Sanford will be in conversation with one another. They and I invite you to pose questions in the question function, and they will turn to those questions during the Q&A period. Fazil and Victoria, the floor is yours with my thanks.
Thank you so much, Debórah, as always, for such a warm welcome. And thank you, Fazil, for being here and making it possible for us to open our event with you. I also want to thank Juan, who always does all of the organizing, the IT people, Eli, everyone Debórah thanked, but really without them, we wouldn't be here. And that's why we recognize them each time we do an event, and for your creative and technical work. So thank you very much. It's really my honor to have Fazil here today, a brilliant scholar, and I think Being Human is one of the most amazing books I've read in recent memory. So Fazil, I would like to kick this off by asking you, because everyone hasn't had a chance to read the book, if you could describe a little bit about the book, introduce us to the book, and also can you tell us a little bit about how you came to do work on the Anfāl genocide, and what that has meant to you. I think that's kind of what the book is about, but that would be the way that I would frame my question, if you would be so kind. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to start by thanking everyone who is involved in organizing and offering this space to thinking and discussion. And I'm grateful to Professor Debórah Dwork and to Professor Victoria Sanford for this moment. I just would like to just share the screen to show a few maps that can help us to enter the context of the book, and then I'm sure we follow the questions. This I'm just trying to share here. You can see it, right?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah. So like many of those acts of political violence that are legally defined and recognized as genocide or feminicide, the Iraqi state too also followed or mobilized and activated its bureaucratic system. I discuss in the book how the advancement and establishment of the Iraqi Baʿth party's political organization and bureaucracy is fundamentally tied to the Nazi state, but also to the post-Nazi East German state. So this is after the Iraqi state and signed by the Iraqi president, Saddam Hussein, after he issues a decree number 160 on March 29, 1987, Ali Hassan al-Majid, as you can see here, who was cousin of Saddam Hussein, became the sovereign leader of the north, that is the Kurdistan region of today. He in turn started with a decree number 3650 issued on June 3rd, 1987, to start with controlling and defining the Kurdistan region by announcing it geographically, delineating it geographically. I learned after discussions with people that are part of the book that after a while they realized that decree number 3650 is not enough to deal with what they came to face. They didn't know what to do with the people in those defined areas that they had gathered and captured. Therefore, he turned to Decree 4008, issued on June 20, 1987. And what I have underlined in red, he said, they write, the military forces are absolutely entitled to kill any human and animal found in the outlawed areas. This includes the villages. So this decree is circulated then through institutions and reaching down to the soldier, to the armed soldier. Following this, I start working with identifying the institutions, but also people involved in this infrastructure of the Anfāl operations. And this involves, of course, the Office of the President of the Republic of Iraq, but also the global arms industry that have played a fundamental role in this, as we will come to discuss. And the infrastructure of the Anfāl operations connects with Zygmunt Bauman's astute observation and Max Weber's of how bureaucracy dehumanizes those involved. And in this case, we have about 350,000 to 400,000 Kurdish collaborators who have been part of this infrastructure targeting the Kurdish population. And also involves, of course, informants at various levels in the Kurdistan region. In my case, I had to, of course, travel there as an anthropologist and travel in this region and try to learn the spaces and move in the spaces. What you can see on the left is today's Kurdistan region. So the entire region became a war zone, a zone of killing indeed. The three cities that you can see, Dahok, Erbil, and Suleimania, were absolutely under the state control, and they were mobilized to become part of this infrastructure of the Anfāl. I have traveled in this area, as I said, but I've focused on certain areas, certain villages in this region, and that is the Balasan and Shehwasan region. And what you can see, this region was attacked with chemical weapons as well. We will come back to the role of chemical weapons. But also, of course, focused on Soleimani because it had it played a fundamental role in Anfāl, and many of survivors have moved there and lived there. And the city of Halabja, which became a site of one of the brutal acts of chemical bombardment since World War II. The other villages that I focused on are Jelamur, with which the book starts, and then it is Chemchamal and Rizgari, which is in different parts of the region. And with the village of Korame. The village of Korame is very particular because it's the only village. It's one of the two villages, but this is the most known, as I discussed in the book, where the army decides in the village to separate men between 15 and 55 and from women, children, and the elderly, and decide to massacre the men on the spot. As I discuss in the book, the massacre doesn't kill everybody. If 6 of those survive, and I have engaged with them. Since the research in this village, 2 of those survivors have died. This was just to offer a background for our discussion. I could go on, Victoria, with this, but do you want me to continue about how I come to this research? I cannot hear you.
There's construction outside, so I was trying to keep the sound down. Yeah, I think it would be great if you could just talk a little bit about how you came to study the Anfāl genocide. And also, because you're extraordinarily humble, if you could also just share with everyone all the different languages you speak, because part of your research is a linguistic feat in my mind, and so impressive. And I know that you're always shy about sharing those kinds of things, but I would love for you to just share that, and also how you came to work on the Anfāl genocide. That would be wonderful.
It is a critical question, actually, at the heart of the book. So after a while of researching and moving the villages and crossing many boundaries that are there as an anthropologist we need to pass, I came to realize that I have articulated a narrative about my own parents. So my parents escaped the so-called Islamic Revolution in Iran, partly because of their religious identity and partly because of their political activities in Iran. And I had to share this with those who asked me, especially women. They would ask me about how is my mother doing. I discussed this in another text. And I had to respond to that question. So my parents escaped towards the end of 79, early 80 to Iraq, and then from there to Sweden. My father died there, and my mother still lives in Sweden. And during a discussion with the person, Richard Rothenberg, who was my supervisor, during discussion with him, he suggested that I focus on the Anfāl operation. I had never imagined that I would go back to Iraq and do research on political violence that my parents also, in a way, survived. I was more interested in South Africa because I had studied already 1 year in South Africa, and I wanted to continue the research on apartheid. I had already started that research, indeed. But then that became the ground that I had to go back to Kurdistan region and focus on this political violence. And as I discuss also in the book, this anthropological research challenged me in many ways as an anthropologist. The challenges came, of course, with languages, challenges of languages, of how important it is, as you yourself, Victoria, discussed in your book, how important it is to really pay attention to every single word. And in this paying attention to every single word and the words that we use became foundational for me to understand how sexual violence took place, how rape took place, because none of those who had survived rape and sexual violence would say it like a phrase. This happened to me, but then they use other words. And of course, I have worked with this, I have learned Sorani, Kurdish, Arabic, Farsi, and used, of course, reading in German, in English, in Swedish. So I moved across these languages, with these languages, in order to come to understand the role, actually the foundational role of language. Because as I discuss in the book, I have this encounter with one of these elderly survivors who has lost his memory. So he just has 1-2 words that he can exchange with me. And another one who has survived the massacre tells me, before we meet, do not expect anything. I'm not going to say a word. So this became a question for me. Okay, if the survivors do not speak, how can we then understand political violence? And the use of language plays a foundational role in the book, because the act of narration or speaking to me became, I applied the concept of translation to understand what it means to speak, and what does, how speaking comes to put us in touch with this other concept of hospitality. Because I have come to understand, following your work and other important works, that it is impossible to return to the violence that has taken place. So every return to the violence is an act of returning to words and language. So language as an act of translation is never speaks to the original violence. The original violence remains inaccessible. But that is also where I turn to hospitality to understand how the violence that is hosted in the body of survivors also keeps them as a hostage, and how slowly this develops to do the same to me as a researcher, as I spent more than 2 years moving these places, and I've kept in touch with most of those people I've worked with until today. And so that was, I'm sure we are coming to these two concepts more, but that's
wonderful. Thank you so much, Fazil. And I think so important, because our work is really about listening and translation. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the Anfāl genocide connects with political modernity, and how should we understand political modernity in the context of Iraq, where multiple acts of genocide and feminicidal violence have occurred?
We have a scholarship that discuss in detail how the concept of political modernity takes us back to 1492 with the arrival of the Spanish in the Americas. To me, as I also make references in the book, political violence are much, much older and goes back to the Mesopotamian. In fact, the genocidal violence of the Mesopotamian empires are something that I'm currently busy working on. But slowly I learned that in my case, political modernity cannot refer to certain periodization or certain historical moment, but to what Zygmunt Bauman calls advanced science. And those are the infrastructures of genocide or technologies of distraction. And the technologies of distraction are, of course, the bureaucratic system, the bureaucratic organization, the activation and mobilization of different state institutions, presence. So there are certain force that we use to contain people, camps that we used, and chemical warfare agents. So the use of chemical warfare agents, like in Halabja, where people have come to remember it as totally independent of the Anfāl operation, because what they have experienced and survived cannot be compared to the Anfāl operations, meaning those operations of attacking a village, capturing the people, transferring the people to a camp, where these people were separated along the line of gender and age, and they were registered, etc. And some of those survived. So the Halabja and in Balisan and Guptapa and Askar and other villages, they have had a different experiences. So political modernity to me refers on one hand to technologies of the distraction. On the other hand, it refers to the fact of the formation of the Iraqi state under the British imperial rule in Iraq, and the role of the Ottoman, French, and the British empires in the formation of the region and identities in Iraq, and the connection of the organization of the Ba'ath Party, which took shape and was established in Syria, and then it was also embraced in Iraq. So we had two Ba'athist parties in Syria and Iraq, and this political organization was based on the Nazi ideologies. And I discussed this, make references to this. So it is in these two cases that I come to understand the connection of the Anfāl operation as acts of genocide to political modernity.
Thank you, Fazil. I'd like to dig a little bit more into your book. In the village of, is it Halamord or Jalamord? How do you pronounce that?
Yeah, Jalamord.
In Jalamord, in the village of Jalamord, a woman who survived the violence speaks a haunting truth. She says, "You have come to them because the murdered can no longer speak." Her words reveal the deep silence left by the dead and how the weight of the silence has been passed on to the survivors. The book, in this sense, is a turning point, a deliberate shift toward those who remain, the living witnesses among whom you are spending your time. Yet despite their survival, they too are burdened with silence, they're ignored, they're marginalized, they're systematically excluded from the question on rights and privileges in post-Ba'ath Iraq. And I think for people like me who are not regional specialists, Latin America is really my area. The assumption is that when the Kurdish, the independent Kurdish government, whatever the specific name of that area is, the assumption is that somehow that becomes more democratic. And so I think that's part of what's shocking to me in the story as well. And that may also be a particularly American and European assumption that after the war things become democratic, because mostly what we know is that they don't. And so the survivors carry the trauma of violence, but also the responsibility of memory, bearing witness to what can no longer be told. So I'm wondering, how does the book account for the condition of survivors and the complexity of their existence?
So this book has taken almost 10 years. And during this time, I also came to work in Rwanda, especially on the memory, on how that genocide is being remembered and politicized. And in that context, I also learned how the survivors in Rwanda live on. the same happened to me in South Africa, and I have come to learn more about the South African context, and also in Western Europe when it comes to the Holocaust, and from your own work to the Maya population in Guatemala. And I have also worked before coming out really with the book with other scholars in this edited volume, which I did together with Maria and Ralph on memory and genocide, where we have many scholars from different parts of the world. So I learned in this context actually that, and in particular in the Kurdistan region, those who have survived do not count. They don't matter. I detail this in the book, how survivors live because of the number of members that they have lost. So they have a monthly annuity from the Kurdistan region, and that starts in the 90s, in the late 90s. And there are two critical women survivors who has pushed that, and I discussed that in the book. I use women survivors because this is how they identify, but I also learned that however we relate to this concept of strategic essentialism, it is essential to make that point in the Kurdistan region, where the gender apartheid was dominant until 2006, indeed, when it comes to the women survivors. So survivor becomes both a concept and a human interaction and relation to learn not only about what happened, how women survivors have come to survive, how the other male survivors have come to survive, but also to learn from the narration of survivors what it means really to be human in a context of violence and in a post-context of violence. So survivors become fundamental to learn about, of course, the organization of political violence, but also at the same time about being human in that context and surviving it. And in this case, I of course, they have different names for survivors, and I discussed that in the book. I couldn't come to any other concept than survivors in the book to be just to the experiences that they shared with me. And it is here that their narration of the violence also comes with this question of justice, of course. For them, justice has never taken place in Iraq or in the Kurdistan region. They still have this 350 to 400,000 Kurdish collaborators, and none of them were tried. So they are still pushing for that legal justice. But at the same time, as I discussed, they do not think that law can give them the justice, that law can speak the language that they are speaking, or address the losses and distractions that they have survived. So they become fundamental in more than one way, both for the organization of genocidal violence and for the understanding of being human.
Thank you so much. And as you know, the same struggle continues in Guatemala today, 40 years after the genocide. So there are these very deep commonalities. In your book, hospitality is not just an ethical responsibility that urges us to welcome survivors and their narration of violence. It extends to offering recognition and care to survivors who remain vulnerable. But it also involves acknowledging what they carry with them, what holds them hostage, and what keeps us as researchers and readers hostage as well. I think this concept is really important to all of us. I kind of put it into the category in my own experience of accompaniment, right? At the end of the day, what matters most to the survivors, they appreciate the books, they appreciate the connections, support for their legal work, their cases, but I think accompaniment kind of goes along with that idea of hospitality. So I'd love it if you could speak about that a little bit more. And then in the context of political violence, such as genocide or feminicide, hospitality gains profound ethical, political, and scholarly significance. You've done an incredible job, I think, in bringing those concepts together, articulating them theoretically, but still keeping it on the ground in the lived experience of survivors, which is incredibly commendable. When genocidal or feminicidal violence seeks to annihilate entire groups, hospitality in and of itself becomes an act of resistance. It affirms the dignity and humanity of those targeted by such violence. Could you elaborate on how you came to understand the importance of hospitality, particularly as a critical approach to understanding state violence and a form of resistance against the political logic of dehumanization and destruction, which is really at the core of genocide?
Thank you. So there are many ways to address this, and I want to focus on what can be what I can say within this limited time. So we all know that political organization, or the modern state or modern imperial state, is based on calculation. This I have come to learn through your work, through the work of Jacques Derrida, Walter Benjamin, and many others. Especially Jacques Derrida in this case, because this is where I also draw on this concept of hospitality. So politics is this constant work of calculation, control, drawing borders, boundaries, the nation, the citizen, all kinds of politicized and naturalized identities that are institutionalized. In my encounter with survivors, it becomes a human encounter. I mean, however we want to understand this concept of human, but this is an open way for me because I have also visited many works, including yours. This act of hospitality, of course, tells us that the violence that resides in the body of survivors cannot be known. It's impossible to reach that violence. Listening here becomes foundational to offer or welcome that hospitality that comes through the narration or the act of translation of the survivors. So it's something that transcends the calculating boundaries rather than revealing the calculation of the modern states. Because for example, for those survivors in the book, they never referred to the concept of genocide, which is also a legal translation or calculation to define and address violence in that way. So the concept of hospitality takes us not only to a world where calculation must be controlled, but also the limit of knowledge about violence that is experienced and that we carry in our body. And in this case, they also take us to a world where hospitality as ways of thinking together, and this is where Homi Bhabha come in and Rumi, the poet, come in. Hospitality becomes this way for us as humans to sit side by side, discuss side by side, engage each other in ways where we cannot start with exercising this, what we have as the concept of sovereignty. So, for example, when a survivor starts to speak about the organization of the violence or the pains carried, I, as a researcher, cannot resort to my sovereignty and tell that person, now you have to stop. I don't want to hear that. Or, no, please allow me to ask this question. So those interrogation or interrogative questions, interruptions, I learned slowly they cannot happen. They cannot take place. So this is where listening becomes fundamental. So just imagine this offered, this is let's share with us this idea of imagining a world where listening is foundational to human interaction, where listening is foundational to formation of a society which survivors call a society that cultivates justice constantly, not through institutions, but through human relations. And this is where it becomes a foundational resistance against political modernity and the formation of the modern state that transcends, that not only transcends, actually that makes impossible any possibility of hospitality or any experience of hospitality, because this is, as I discussed, following Zygmunt Bauman and others, the modern state consists of institutionalized bureaucracy that are constantly dehumanizing those involved or tangled or shaped by these institutions, whether it is institutions of higher learning or military institution or economic institutions. So this is in this context that the idea or the imagination of the human, or the idea that comes, or the imagination that comes with this experience of hospitality, takes us to another world where we need to rethink the very idea of the modern state, or the very idea of politics. And that's where I try to think them together. And of course, I bring in philosophy, literature, and poetry, but also anthropology. It happens, hospitality happens, as Derrida would say, unconditionally, in the sense that is tied to conversations like ours. But also at time it was conditional. I had to go or mention certain people before being allowed to enter a village, or before being allowed into a home. So the both exist side by side. I don't know if I responded the questions, but this is all I can say within this limited time.
No, I think you did. It's funny too, because as you're responding to that question, one of the things that it was making me remember are memories that were shared with me from survivors about why their village was attacked, or what the accusations were that were made by the military against individuals. And it was always, you gave water. Right? You gave water, or you gave food. So, and because the very basis of Mayan community is your identity is first, like our Western identity is in the individual first and the community second, and they're always kind of in competition, but it's individually based. In Mayan community, it's community based first and individually based second. And so you would never not offer to share your food, your water, your home with any other human coming through, right? So therein is hospitality, but that's not allowed. Right? That's not allowed under a military dictatorship. That's not allowed under a counterinsurgency campaign. And so the very act of offering water to someone who's thirsty can get your children, your husband, you, your entire family, your entire village killed. And so it's it's also amazing to me to think about the deep bravery and courage that these survivors have to invite us into their villages, invite us into their homes, and share their stories with us when it is still a risk. It is still a risk for them. And yet they do it because of a commitment to truth and the memory of what's been lost. And I think that comes through really beautifully in your book as well. But that was what was kind of the images that I had while you were speaking, were the images that people have shared with me in the mountains and in the lowlands of Guatemala. So I thank you for that. So
And
I have, go ahead.
Yeah, just here, because your reference to the village of Jalamur, I can just give one example. So I visited this village several times in the beginning. And then I had this encounter with Uncle Rajab, or Mom Rajab, as they call it. He died, as I mentioned in the book. I had this encounter with him in this room that has a door and a window, and he's lying there all alone with his cigarettes and water. And that's all he can offer me. He cannot talk. And he just says, the only thing he told me was welcome. So I was touched by this. I came out of the room, and then there was a woman survivor there. And he knew, he knew that he has nothing to tell me. Or she knew, I'm sorry. And then we started sitting outside, and she offered me a cigarette, and then we started smoking together. She told me, started with this. And she said, here, I'm going to speak, so you can record it. Very consciously. And she told me, I know that you come from Germany. So you have an understanding of what has happened here, but let me tell you this. And then she started that quote in detail. And she insists that I write every single word. And that in that very short narration, the act of hospitality, where I am forced to surrender before her, in her presence, to her narration. She, at the same time, everything she says is about political violence. How the political violence during the Ba'ath state of Iraq and the post-Ba'ath, the Kurdistan region of Iraq. This violence has never ended. Before it was genocidal violence, now the village is about to die away. So there is no care for the village. So it is this kind of, moments where hospitality as a resistance against political violence or political modernity or a state comes at once. It's impossible to disentangle the one from the other. And that was one of those moments that made me think after a few years about the use and the relevance and importance of the concept of hospitality, because this happened to me over and over again. And every time I went back to the village, this was one of those moments, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. It's very evocative and visual to see it and hear it and feel it. So I have a few more questions. We still have some time. In your book, you explore the pursuit of legal justice in the aftermath of state violence, dedicating a chapter to the relationship between law, the death penalty, and the concept of justice in, but also beyond the 20th century, as well as the law's role in the justice for the Anfāl genocide. If humans cannot be the perpetrators of genocidal or feminicidal violence, how can we then understand legal responsibility, justice, or even politics?
It's very, very important. And that's, of course, your work, question of law. Coming from the survivors, it was fundamental that there was a tribunal, an Anfāl tribunal. And it was both important in the sense that those who perpetrated the violence must realize that they cannot do this to anyone in the country. For example, one of the survivors of the chemical warfare agent that discussed, she told me, I cannot describe this moment when I was sitting there in the courtroom and Saddam Hussein was beneath my shoes. That carries an incredible significance when you say it in the Iraqi context. And she told me, I told him, Saddam Hussein, you are always celebrating the Iraqi nation, always celebrating it. So why did you do this to us? Weren't we the Iraqi nation? And she would repeat that to me over and over again. And she was also repeating this because she was disturbed. Saddam Hussein was not hanged because of the Anfāl operations. So was killed because of another act of political violence against the Shiite population in the south. following, this was the Baghdad Tribunal happened, of course, as I discussed, after or following the United States and UK and the Allies' invasion of Iraq and the establishment of the tribunal. And it applies, of course, the 1948 United Nations Genocide Convention, the Nuremberg Principles, and the Iraqi Penal Code of 1969. So there is that legal process, that we all know, the collection of evidence, that all, it was legal procedures in that context. The tribunal played also for us as scholars a foundational role because it is accumulation of knowledge about how the state organized the violence. But for survivors, it is not enough. It is not enough because they haven't had any other accountable state or political organization following the Iraqi Baʿth state, and many of those who played fundamental roles in the destruction of the villages were not tried. So the law for us in this context, as we know in the 20th century, the Nuremberg trials in Rwanda, and in Guatemala, it is this constant, it becomes a constant process of individualization of genocidal violence. And to me, in the book, I discussed that genocidal violence is foundational to the formation of the modern state. So it is impossible to think that genocide is acts of violence committed by a human group against another human group. So at the core of genocide is the state. And this is where justice, or haq, as they say, take another form, because it is both a question of right and justice. And they think, many of them would refer always to God as the one who knows, as the transcendental witness, who knows what happened, and the only one who can offer justice. But at the same time, they would insist that there is a need for another tribunal or the continuation of the tribunal in Baghdad for the trial of the perpetrators. So justice here for me became a question of, also another question of hospitality, as tied to hospitality, because it is never achieved and it cannot be known. We cannot know this justice. And as that woman survivor in the village of Jalamur tells me, the Kurdistan region must stop its political calculation and going and finding the mass graves and exhuming this body and bringing them and putting them in other graves. They should leave them there. They should not touch those bodies. And her concern is much more the living generation, the living survivors, their children. So it is the concept of justice is both legal, but also becomes foundational to the making of a just society, which they call Dad Parwer, a society that cultivates justice, constantly cultivates justice. So this is following the survivors' experiences, memories, narrations. If we can learn what it means to being human, and at the same time, what it means, how important it is for a just society in order to the possibility of being human as beyond the possibility of violence.
Thank you, Fazil. That was really eloquent and beautiful. It makes me think of all the struggles for reparations, right? Because that's what reparations really are, is the cultivation of justice as well. So thank you for that. I have one more question and then we'll open it up. Let's take a moment to discuss how the Anfāl genocide is remembered. In many ways, your entire book can be seen as an exploration of the possibility of critical memory or remembrance. How does the political economy of memory, something often in the afterlives of state violence, how does that work in the Kurdistan region of Iraq?
It is a critical question. I mean, we all know that there is always a political economy following political violence. And in Kurdistan region, they established after the trial, it became unified because Kurdistan was also divided between two dominant political parties. And there was between 94 and 98, they had what they call fratricide, a war between the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan and the Kurdistan Democratic Party, two political parties. But they, after 2006, 2007, they established what they call Ministry of Martyr and Anfāl Affairs. And this is entirely political institutions. I give one example in the book. In one of the organized remembrance of of Anfāl and Halabja chemical bombardment, there was a document that was circulating among survivors and activists, and no one could openly talk about this document in the local or national media. The document documents a deal with an agency to organize this remembrance in these two cities, in Halabja and in Erbil. For both of these events, they write that they have paid $1,700,000 for this, and then we realized that this doesn't even cost $50,000 what they organized in the city of Halabja and in Erbil. This is one example, and the document I discuss it in the book. There are many other such events. The critical memory, of course, is a global memory. So we have symbolic and cemeteries where exhumed bodies are buried, or brought back and buried, but they are not identified yet. There is only one cemetery where the bodies are identified, and that was done by Clyde Snow, the forensic anthropologist. He did this research in Koramidat village. So they did this critical forensic study, and they identified the bodies. So this is the only cemetery that exists where the bodies are identified. So there are these symbolic and unidentified cemeteries. There are museums. And the museum was also another, for example, the museum in Erbil was another act of corruption. And so they built a gigantic museum. I don't know how many millions, because they would not reveal it. And it was abandoned. So nothing was happening there. They are trying to activate it now. And so there are museums, cemeteries, memorials, and some survivors, they build their own memorials, like building a wall and writing the name of those who were annihilated or made disappear. And then we have artworks. I discuss in the book these drawings by Osman Ahmed. He did his PhD on the basis of taking the testimonies from survivors and turning them into drawings, because he believed that we don't have images, so we cannot see what happened. In this way, he visualized these separate acts of violence from the moment of arriving in the villages, capturing the people, deporting them, and what happened inside the camps. So I discussed these different sides and as what I call genocide. So side of a nation or a people or a race, because this is how they have come to introduce and institutionalize the politics of memory, which makes everyone forget about the economic aspect of it and the corruption around it. I also make this aspect, to go back to the earlier question of political modernity, to show how there is, outside of Soleimani, there is one of this engraved on a mountain, a relief of Naram-Sin, one of the Sumerian king, who is still there, the relief is still there. I try to discuss how the drawing connects with this relief of the king, and the relief is engraved on a mountain, and then there are these bodies falling from the sky or under the feet of the king. So I try to connect not only the role of art in this context, but also how political violence is so old in the country. Like you were saying, that there are more than one genocide and feminicidal violence in Iraq, and that's not modern. Try to connect with that in that way.
Great, thank you so much. I just had one question. I know that on the museum issue that like corruption is a huge part of it. But I'm also wondering how much of it is political infighting about responsibility. And as you mentioned, there are the 350 or 400,000 people who participated in the genocide who've never been brought to justice. Because I know in the case of Guatemala, that's what has impeded establishing any kind of national museum is that, and there has been money raised, but it's also disappeared. But that it has more to do with the battle over memory, like who gets to say what the story is that will be told there. And I'm reminded of the museum set up on the island of Jeju in South Korea, where there was a genocide committed in 1948 and or 1946, and the museum actually is quite beautiful and quite breathtaking, but they have a sign at the entrance that's blank. And it's left blank because what they want to put there is the description of the event, but they have not been able to reach agreement. So there are the pieces of the history and the story from different perspectives inside the museum, but it doesn't say what it was, which I thought was kind of fascinating.
Yeah, in this case, just to say this also is it's very interesting because in the museums that I discussed, one of it was a jail in the city of Suleimania. It's called Red Security, and they turned us into a museum where they can narrate that history of political prisoners were detained there, but also make it part of the Anfāl genocide. And in that museum, there is no reference to the Kurdish collaborators, no reference whatsoever. It's completely erased and completely denied. So we have only two figures, two names, Saddam Hussein and Ali Hassan Majid, as the key perpetrators of the genocide, as if they could, as two individuals, organize this act of genocide.
Right. Right. Thank you. It's super interesting. So we're running out of time almost, but do we have any questions? Juan, has anyone put questions on the board? Let me see if I see any in the.
So we don't have any questions in the
Oh,
Q&A.
we don't. Okay, so I can ask another question, or do you have a question, or Debórah? Otherwise, I'll ask another question.
I would like to ask one.
Please take the floor.
So Fazil, one of my doctoral students is writing a wonderful dissertation on mechanisms of justice for Holocaust survivors after the war. And we know about trials, of course, but what she argues is that trials are a kind of blunt instrument. And that for each person, justice, what constitutes justice? What does it look like? And I pose the question to you.
That's a critical question. As I was trying to explain, so it is of course fundamental for survivors to know about what happened, and that we come to learn through these legal proceedings. But it is, I try to think with this, what Jacques Derrida says. It is just that there is law, but law is not justice. And that I come to learn from survivors, that for them, justice can never take place. It always remains to come. It is a future that as I discuss in the book, some of the survivors never come to experience. So justice in this case would be the formation of a just society, a society where hospitality has a space, where human interactions take place on other grounds than on the basis of politicized identities. And it is here important, actually, because like Victoria was saying, as I also tried to show in the beginning of the book, that the book is not really about proving a genocide or offering a detailed account of the number of people who were destroyed or number of villages were destroyed. So to me, of interest is this question of being human. And this question of being human was impossible for me to think without this concept of hospitality. It is fair and just to say here that the notion of being human is taken from a poem by Rumi. This being human is a guest house. And I take that to think with it in the book. And of course, other scholars in the book become foundational. But I don't know, but I have just this thought that as long as we have this political organization that we call state, justice is always delayed.
Which is a perfect note to end on. So I thank you so much, Fazil, and I thank you so much, Victoria, and I thank everyone who has joined us today. It has been a rich and evocative conversation, which we need to hold inside and think through. So thank you for that gift.
Thank you, Debórah. Thank you, Fazil, for joining us. It was truly wonderful.
Thank you, Debórah, and thank you, Victoria, and thank everybody else for this space. Please do everything to keep this space.
Thank you. Bye. Have a great rest of the day, everyone.